Hello, friends, and shalom. This is Tom with Truth Ignited Ministry, where we're telling you what they don't teach you in the churches. And we're picking up on this idea of Lucifer, the deceiver, the one who appears as an angel of light. And you know, we were talking in the last message a little bit about at the end about Christmas and Easter and Halloween and reading from a book by a literal Wiccan author who is a historian and a lecturer, or was at one time a lecturer at a major university, you know, somebody who actually would know something about some of these things. And we were going through some of that, and you know, I sometimes I think about the Santa Claus character when it comes to this topic. You know, like the Santa Claus character just baffles me. It just blows my mind when I see Christians fighting and fighting and fighting to defend things like the Santa Claus character. Now I know most of them are ignorant, and most of them think that it's, you know, Nicholas of Myra, which that would be bad enough, right? Because that's a Catholic saint. That's the veneration of saints under the Catholic Church, which is itself idolatry and paganism, which is, you know, you think about the veneration of saints, and when you compare it to other pagan religions, there's really no difference. They deify these characters that they call saints, whether it's Saint Nicholas or Saint Valentine or Saint Patrick, who I've done studies on Patrick, and he wasn't even remotely close to what the Catholic Church presents it, and I'll be glad to present on that sometime. But, you know, Saint Gregory, you know, Saint whatever, you know, all these popes that they call saints and everything, after they die, they become saints. You know, that's just like the pharaohs in Egypt. The pharaohs in Egypt, you know, they lived their lives as gods of a sort here on the earth, and when they died, they were fully deified into gods in the afterlife. The Catholic Church does the same thing with their saints. It's just like the emperor worship in Rome under the imperial cult. That's where it really comes from. That's, you know, where all of this kind of molds into what the Roman Catholic religion has done, and it's just mind-boggling to me that people don't take the time to learn this stuff and to study this history, and they just go along with whatever the churches are doing. And if people are doing it at church, if Christians are doing it, it must be okay because all the Christians at church are doing it, so it must be okay. You know, and the character of Santa Claus, you know, it's got ties to the Norse god Odin, right? It's got connections to a Krampus devil. It's got connections to racism through, you know, this character called Zwarte Piet, or Black Peter, which was a slave. It was Santa Claus's black slave. That's what it was. That's part of the Santa Claus legend. The Santa Claus mythology is racism and Krampus devils and all of this crazy mess that goes into the Santa Claus character and literal gods from pagan religions and all of these things, and Catholic idolatry through the veneration of saints. That's what your Santa Claus character is. You can make stuff up all you want to. It doesn't change the facts. You can try to justify it in your mind all that you want to. It doesn't change the truth from being the truth. The truth is always going to be the truth. And if you don't want to accept the truth, go on living the lie. But guess what? There's going to come a day when you're going to stand before the judgment. And what are you going to do then? What are you going to do on the day when you stand before the judgment? When you stand there before the throne of God, facing the Messiah that you claimed was your Messiah, but you defied at every turn, and you don't want to face that truth now? Well, guess what? You're gonna face it then. You might as well face the truth now, because now you have a chance. But on that day, when that day comes, you run out of chances. Now, I'm not trying to scare you or anything, but I'm trying to get you to use some common sense and just be reasonable here. You know, I mean, check this out. Let me just ask you this question, all right? What if Satan created Christianity? Now I know that is just to a lot of people that would sound blasphemous. Oh, how could you say that Satan created Christianity? I can't believe that you would say such a thing. Oh, Satan did not create Christianity. Jesus created Christianity. Peter created Christianity. The Apostle Paul, I've had so many conversations with people here recently trying to tell me about Paul's gospel. Paul this and Paul that. Why don't you read Paul in context? Because if Paul said what you say he said, Christians, if he really meant what you believe he meant, Christians, then Paul has to be a heretic according to the Bible. Paul is not some magical figure who popped up on the scene and said, hey, the rest of the Bible is wrong. I got this great revelation. And Jesus was wrong. He was wrong when he said that if you love me, keep my commandments. He was wrong when he said, I came not to abolish the Torah. He was wrong when he said that if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. He was wrong because I'm the Apostle Paul and I got this great new revelation that goes against everything everybody else who wrote the Bible said, including Jesus and including the other apostles. Look, Yeshua taught the Torah. The other apostles taught the Torah. You gotta really have like a delusional theology to read 1 John and not see how it upholds the commandments of God, the Torah of Yah. And your theology has to be just whacked to not see that. But Paul didn't come on the scene and teach a different gospel. Paul said, my message is the same as the message of Yeshua. That's what he said. He said the Torah is holy and righteous and good. That's in Romans chapter 7. He said that it's not the hearers of the Torah who are righteous, but the doers of the Torah who will be justified. Romans chapter 2, verse 13. Okay, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, he was admonishing people to keep the feast days. He was focused on Passover and unleavened bread, and most likely it's because he was writing it during that time of the year, and so that's the one that was probably most on his mind when he wrote that letter. But he was ultimately saying, keep the feast, keep the feast. In Acts chapter 20, he was eager to get back to Jerusalem to keep the feast. And if you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17, he's quoting the prophet Isaiah. So there's no way you can argue some kind of people try to argue a context issue with that one. You can't, because he was quoting the prophet Isaiah. We know the context when we go to the book of Isaiah. Okay? And he said, touch no unclean thing if you want to be received by God. You got Christians today going around telling, we can eat whatever we want to now that those food laws for the Jews were done away with. That's a lie. They're not telling you the truth. They're lying to you. They have been wholly taken over by a doctrine of demons. Okay? We talked in the last message about a doctrine of demons. Demons don't teach people to follow the laws of God. Demons teach people not to follow the laws of God. If you don't believe me, read Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, and tell me whether the serpent was trying to get the people to obey God or to rebel against God. It's not that hard to figure this stuff out, And we just need to get this stuff right, man. This not that hard. It's not that hard. So think about, what if Satan created Christianity? I'll get back on that here in just a moment. Look, if you read the Bible, if that's the only thing you ever done, and your whole knowledge of biblical faith only came from reading the Bible, you would get a particular view of what it means to follow the Bible, to follow Yeshua, to have faith in God. You would have a particular idea about that. On the other hand, if your whole knowledge of, quote, biblical faith came only from listening to Christian pastors and evangelists and prophets, these Christian prophets, look, let me just throw this in here at you, okay? Because there's a lot of people out there calling themselves prophets today, and they're ripping people off because they're giving, what they're really doing is soothsaying, fortune telling. Okay, that's what they're really doing. And they're calling themselves prophets because they throw a little Bible on, they sprinkle a little Bible on their sorcery, and they go around and they convince people, and they'll use the same methods that fortune tellers and soothsayers use to predict certain future things. And when some of those things begin to happen the way that they alluded would happen, and most of the time it's pretty vague, but sometimes they do get a little specific. But when those things happen, then people are like, oh, he must be a prophet of God. She must be a prophetess. And then it's not that difficult for them to say, oh yeah, you should financially support my ministry. If you sow a $1,000 seed into my ministry, God will bless you with blah, 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 blah. Look, and I know that there is some biblical aspect to some of that, but look, the Bible tells us how to spot a false prophet in Deuteronomy chapter 13. And the number one thing that determines a false prophet is that they teach against the commandments of God. They teach an anti-Torah message. So when these people are prophesying to you, why don't you start asking them their view on the food laws in Leviticus 11? Why don't you ask them their view on the actual Sabbath day? Not some made-up Christian Sabbath, some Sunday is the Sabbath now because of X, Y, and Z, or Jesus is our Sabbath now and we rest in him. No, not that stuff. The Sabbath day as established in Scripture, because there's nothing in the Bible that ever changes the Sabbath day from sunset on a Friday evening on our calendars, modern calendars, what would equate to sunset on Friday evening to sunset on Saturday evening. That is the period of time in a Hebrew week that the Sabbath is, and that is the only time that the Sabbath is. And if anybody tells you different, they're lying to you. And when these so-called prophets are celebrating the Christmas and the Easter, and they're having their big festivals and leading in the masses, come to our churches, come to our events. We're having, the barbecue with the swine flesh rolling. We're going to have circus events at our Easter production. We're going to have pictures with the Santa Claus at our big Christmas production. Come everyone, come to our churches. And then why don't you ask them their view of specific things of the Torah? Why don't you ask them when they're doing those Christmas and Easter big celebratory events with all the worldliness involved in it? Why don't you ask them what their view of Deuteronomy chapter 12 verses 29 through 31 is? Why don't we start there? Because their Christmas and their Easter celebrations go directly against the commandment of God in those passages. Look, man, I'm just telling you that the Christian religion could not be more different from what the Bible says. It's night and day. It's apples and oranges. They are two completely different things. You listen to the message of Christianity, and you listen to the message of Christianity, and if you really listen to what they're saying, and if you compare it to what the Bible actually says, they're different. They're not the same. A.W. Tozer. Now, A.W. Tozer was a popular preacher of a previous generation, and he's often cited because he said some pretty profound things. Now, ultimately, so far as I can tell, Tozer was not a follower of the Torah, so I just want to put that out there, And I want to put that out there anytime I quote somebody. And I've quoted a lot of people, like in the last message I mentioned Charles Spurgeon, A.W. Pink. These were men that spoke against Christmas and things. But it seems that they were not 100% in the Torah positive view, despite making statements that would make you scratch your head and say, how were these people not following the Torah completely when they said these things? But listen to this. This is what A.W. Tozer once said. Throughout the whole world, error and truth travel the same highways, work in the same fields and factories, attend the same churches, fly in the same planes, and shop in the same stores. So skilled is this error at imitating truth that the two are constantly being mistaken for each other. It takes a sharp eye these days to know which brother is Cain and which is Abel. Look, if you don't know what the Bible says, you're susceptible to deception. That's just the way it is. Look, check this out. One piece of fruit. That's all it was. It was one piece of fruit. If you go back to Genesis chapter 3, now, I know that there are people out there that will argue that Genesis chapter 3, and some go like the first 11 chapters of Genesis. Well, the first 11 chapters of Genesis are not real history. They're allegory. They're analogies, they're hyperbole, whatever term they want to use. They'll go through and they'll try to sound all fancy and all educated and say, well, these passages are not really telling real history. This isn't real history. There wasn't really a global flood as described in the Bible. There wasn't really a tree with a serpent. And now the talking serpent thing, there may be some merit to that, but there's actually, if you really go back, you see through some of these cultures in ancient times, there were serpent religions and serpent kings. It was a whole big thing. One of the earliest known religious practices was worship of a serpent. So there was something at the tree, in the midst of Eden, at the tree, there was something, some being was there that was identified as the serpent. Okay? And if you go to Revelation chapter 12, verse 9, it tells us that the serpent is Satan. Okay? So, regardless of whether it was a literal talking serpent, which is not out of, it's not impossible. It's not impossible that there was a talking serpent, because we're talking pre-fall Eden. And there are people who speculate that Adam and Eve were able to actually talk to the animals, and the animals were able to talk back to them before the fall. Now I know that that's, kind of a wild theory, but, I'm not going to say that it's out of the question that there was a literal talking serpent. But, people try to argue this stuff. And look, maybe the story was hyperbole or allegorical in nature to a certain degree. But the literal text of the literal Bible literally says that there was a literal tree and a literal piece of fruit and a literal serpent that was there speaking to literal Adam and Eve, and literally said, did God really say that if you eat that fruit, you'll die? Now listen, I want to make a proposition to you. God knows that you won't die if you eat that fruit. In fact, he knows that you'll be like him if you eat that fruit. So you really need to eat that. That's what the literal text says. So it was one piece of fruit, regardless of whether or not it was literal or literary. It was a piece of fruit, according to the Bible, that caused everything. One piece of fruit caused every earthquake, tornado, tsunami, flood, hurricane, lightning strike, every major storm on the face of this earth, every storm that has killed people on the face of this earth was caused by that act of eating one piece of forbidden fruit. Sickness, disease, plagues. We've come recently through a major plague, and I know that there's a lot of debate about that particular scenario and how things played out, but look, it seems at least, that there was a real disease that people died from, okay? And even at that, there are other diseases. There's cancers. There's all kinds of diseases and sicknesses and things that cause people to die. And that happened because of one piece of fruit. Pharaoh, when he enslaved the Israelite people, and every form of slavery before and since, slavery in the United States, the slave trade, all of that slavery is the result of people eating one piece of fruit. Because had they not eaten that one piece of fruit, regardless of what the Bible says about parameters of slaves and how to properly treat slaves and whatnot, slavery as a concept is the result of that one piece of fruit. Hitler, the Nazis, killing 6 million Jews, all kinds of genocide and just mass slaughter of people, whatever the case may be. One piece of fruit did that. War, every war that this planet has ever suffered, and every war that this planet will suffer. There's currently a conflict in Israel. Israel of all places. There's been a major conflict going on as I'm making this message. There's wars all the time, small wars and big wars, and there's been world wars, and there's been all kinds of slaughter and killing of people. And it's all because of that one piece of fruit. That one piece of fruit convinced one person to defy God. And from that piece of fruit, that started a chain reaction of evil on this planet and a curse on this planet. And it's destroyed lives. It's destroyed the earth. It's destroyed nature. It's destroyed ecosystems. It's destroying our planet. And it was just a single piece of fruit. Look, read the Bible. Read through the eyes of this model. There is lawlessness and there is righteousness. Okay? The Bible describes Satan, Lucifer, as the lawless one. The one who is against God's laws. We see that in Genesis chapter 3. He's the one that stands against God's laws. Again, doctrines of demons. Demons don't go around trying to convince people to follow the Bible, to live according to the Torah. That is not the doctrine of demons. When people tell you that it's a doctrine of demons to put people back under the law, as they like to say, they're lying to you. They're not telling you the truth. I heard a preacher one time talking about kingdom over culture. Kingdom over culture. We got to put the kingdom above the culture. And every time you turned around, they were embracing worldliness and the worldly culture that they live in. And everything they were doing was worldly and more about being worldly. And, they make up this stuff about, we're just trying to make ourselves relevant. We're just trying to give them, to draw them in. This is just bait to draw them in. Look, the Bible doesn't tell you to sin in order to save people. That is counterproductive. That's like the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of, is that you have to sin in order to save people. What kind of an absurd theology is that? And yet that's what so many of these churches believe. If I were Satan, I would create a religion, a whole religion, and I would make it look like it's the religion of the Bible, and I would make it sound like the religion of the Bible, and in reality, it would be the complete opposite of what the Bible actually says, and Satan has accomplished that through the Christian religion. It started with Roman Catholicism. It evolved into Protestant Christianity and other forms of Christianity that have branched out, and everybody has embraced these lies that they don't have to follow the laws of God. You know, they'll tell you, well, we follow some laws. You know, we still believe that you can't murder people, and we still believe that you shouldn't commit adultery, but those food laws, no, that's done away with, and that Sabbath day, that was done. They make this stuff up because there's no basis for it in the Bible. Look, friends, I don't know how much more plain I can make some of this. This is the dichotomy, the conflict between the lawless one and the righteous one, between Lucifer and Yeshua. That's the war that we're caught in the middle of, is the war between lawlessness and righteousness. And lawlessness is a word used in the Bible. I mean, it's right in the word, lawless. It's against the laws of God. And you do a study on the word law. There's not many places it's used in the Bible, but there's enough. There are a lot of places that use the word lawless, or lawlessness, or some form of it. There's enough that you can look at it and you can see what the apostles were writing about lawlessness. You know, Matthew 7, verse 21 through 23, it tells us that the people who are, first of all, it describes a group of people that only matches the description of Christians. Okay, it describes people doing these miracles and signs and wonders in the name of Yeshua. The only people who do that, who claim to do that, are Christians. And then it says that those people are going to be rejected for lawlessness. They're going to be turned away from the eternal kingdom because they rejected the Torah. They claim that they follow the Messiah, but they reject his Torah. And he's going to turn right around and say, nope, you're not getting in. You didn't follow the law. You can't make it more plain. And Satan has done this. He's created a religion, a whole religion, as prophesied in Matthew 7, verses 21 through 23. That is the religion Satan has created, and it's the religion of the masses. It's the religion of 2.4 billion people who call themselves Christians and say that because they're Christians, they don't have to follow certain parts of the Bible. That makes no sense. So, and that's where we're at. And folks, I got to bring this message to an end. It's been really great getting on here and kind of sharing with you what the Spirit has given me to talk about today, about Lucifer, the great deceiver, and his methods of deception and how he goes about his business. He's given people fake holidays to celebrate. They're not in the Bible. Christmas, Easter, and Halloween are not in the Bible. Read Leviticus 23. You will find the holy days that God gave us. And if that's not enough, he turned around and gave us a book of Esther that has the festival of Purim in it. And then in John chapter 10, verse 22 to 23, it talks about Hanukkah, which was established during what people call the intertestamental period. So we've got even more holidays. And if you really look at it, he gave us so much more celebration. And a lot of it is foreign to the Christian because Satan has deceived people that deeply. So look, folks, as I like to say, there's much to be gained by a return to the discarded values of the past. I'll see you on the next message. Hey there, I'm so glad you tuned in today. Now, if you enjoy the teachings of Truth Ignited and you want to financially support the ministry, we want to offer you a few ways to do that. First, we've got our Cash App. Scan the QR code or use $Truth Ignited. Now, this is a preferred method because we don't incur any fees for this service. But we understand that not everybody uses the Cash App, so you can also go to our Spotify for Podcasters page right here, and you can sign up to become a $5 or $10 monthly partner. You can also visit truthignited.com and give your financial support there and find a lot more great messages just like the one you listen to. Also, be sure to check out our TeePublic store, where you can find a lot of really cool merchandise, t-shirts and other items that you can use to show off your faith. Be sure to follow Truth Ignited on Facebook, Twitter or X, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. And remember to share these messages on all of your social media pages. I'll see you next time. Blessings and shalom.